the claim that faulty or invalid forensic science is a major cause of erroneous convictions is patently false. However, we've learned a lot from the post-conviction experience, and we've learned some things about ourselves as a profession that have allowed us to get better.
When you look at the ones who are exonerated and what all had to happen for them to be exonerated, some of it complete serendipitous luck, that had it not happened, they wouldn't have been, you have to realize that for everybody, I think it's very reasonable to say that for everybody who manages to become exonerated, there's 20 innocent people who have not been able to thread that treacherous needle.
That's one of the reasons that DNA experts are so valuable, right? Because through the ability to DNA profile, to run things through CODIS, to identify perpetrators faster, that helps with the crime prevention function of the criminal justice system. So that's one way in which forensic DNA experts help to contribute to crime prevention. One of the things that really impressed us with regards to, from a research standpoint, with regards to these these overturned convictions, was that the degree of campaigning that has to happen in order to get the attention of criminal justice authorities to relook at the case. And within that campaigning, there can be some egregious behaviors on the part of innocence activists and post-conviction litigators, just as there can be egregious behaviors on the part of investigators and prosecutors before an original trial. So we really came out of that study with an appreciation for how important integrity is in criminal justice in any stage of a case, before trial, during the trial, after trial, during post-conviction proceedings, and so forth. That was really, really important to us. Other researchers have uncovered this even recently, and that is that in criminal justice jurisdictions that are very punitive in nature, that's to say that these are criminal justice systems where there is throw them in prison, lock them up and throw away the key sort of mentality, that those jurisdictions are more vulnerable to error because of the motivation that's involved, the motivation to get the conviction and to satisfy one's hawkish, tough-on-crime attitude. And that oftentimes conflicts with what I think is a healthier motivation, which is the integrity of the proceedings. In other words, we are going to have due process here, and we're going to make sure that the trial is fair, and we're going to make sure that the evidence is presented in an honest, responsible, and professional way. And if we do that, we're going to trust that the outcome is going to be accurate. Our criminal justice system is going through a transition. And what's happening is it's transitioning from a punishment-based system to an intervention-based system. And it's a very, very slow process. We know, for example, that the percentage of prisoners that are in prison for violent crimes have learning disabilities, they have mental impairments, they have communication disorders. And so what we're starting to realize is that our punitive system, or our lock them up and throw away the key attitude doesn't work anymore, that we need to really rethink that. And I like being a part of the process of thinking through how do we do that in a really responsible way, because there are things about our criminal justice system that work really, really well compared to other countries, and we don't want to lose the essence of that. But what we find is that when you take a real punitive attitude towards adjudication of cases, you set up some risk, because what happens is you are very, very motivated to get a conviction. There's a lot of resources online about overturned convictions, about the Innocence Project, the Innocence Network, that's very available. The book that I wrote, Crime Lab Report, is a textbook which sort of memorializes things that happened from the O.J. Simpson trial up to about 2018 or so, and deals with a lot of the controversies in the criminal justice system and the misunderstanding of forensic science and the strengths and weaknesses of forensic science. The books, the writings of Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, who were the founders of the Innocence Project, are very helpful, and they've done a lot of writing over the years. I think they wrote a book called Actual Innocence, if I'm not mistaken. That would be a good read. But I think at the top of the list of resources that if people really want to dive into this and understand these cases is what's called the National Registry of Exonerations, which is maintained by a consortium of universities in partnership with the Innocence Project and some other organizations, where they keep a lot of data on convictions that have been overturned.
I'm doing a lot of work with NIST. We're publishing this summer a handbook on human factors and forensic DNA interpretation. And so the people, and Melissa Taylor, they had a working group and they made a process map of all the decisions that had to be made in the DNA testing process. And it's astounding when you see how long that list is of decisions that you don't even realize that you're making on a regular basis in interpretation of a DNA profile. And these people who are involved in these cases, they're not just DNA analysts, they're crime scene investigators, and they're polygraphers, and they're prosecutors, and all of these people have their own human experience, and how they're going to act is going to be shaped by that. There are certain things that we can do, I think, as scientists to mitigate the way that our evidence is being viewed by the whole system. And like I said, we have to take it down off that pedestal. We have to be the ones to say, no, DNA can transfer inadvertently. So if all the other evidence in a case is pointing in one direction and DNA is pointing in another, you really need to consider that.
As professionals, we have to care about how that information is being used, at least to the extent that we are able to. And so it's really, really critical that in whether you're talking about an original trial after a crime is committed or you're talking about post-conviction litigation, that you do your job to the best of your ability, be as clear and as accurate and as complete as possible in the work that you're doing so that you can have some faith that the individuals that are going to use your conclusions in the argument that they're going to make are going to do so while being as informed as possible. And so that's where being an expert really requires you to be a teacher in many ways, and to teach the people that are going to be using your evidence to make whatever argument they're going to make are going to be able to do so with a greater level of integrity. And that's a tremendous responsibility to take on, and people have to be aware of that responsibility.
There's resistance to recognize how much we bring to the process as a person, and all of our foibles and all of our biases, and how that creates the potential for these things to happen. Because if I inadvertently call a suicide a homicide, right, what's going to happen? We will find somebody and we will arrest them for a crime that they did not commit. And, well, that's a problem, right? And I don't know, how do we address that? And conversely, if I misinterpret a scene and the medical examiner agrees with that or doesn't find any information to the contrary, and they call what should have been a homicide into a suicide, well, we never do anything. And as a result, it never gets investigated. And, I mean, what's worse for society? I'm not sure. Right? The idea that somebody is lurking out there, a murderer with no repercussions, or a person who did not commit a crime in jail for a crime that was not committed, so therefore they couldn't have committed it. And so, I think we need to be more mindful of our fallibility in all of this.
Tim had been in the Army, was honorably discharged, actually fought in you know, whatever it was, the Grenadian conflict, and was at Texas Tech getting an undergraduate degree. And his sister was in the Texas Tech Law School. I think she was the only African American in the Texas Tech Law School. I mean, I guess here's a family that, by all counts, is doing everything right. You know, I mean, in working hard and staying out of trouble, and doing the right things. And Tim was falsely accused of being the quote-unquote tech rapist.
Timothy Cole was a veteran and student at Texas Tech in 1985 when he was wrongfully accused and later convicted of sexually assaulting a fellow student.
He didn't really fit the description. There was a lot of things that weren't right, but they decided it was him. Apparently they had an undercover female officer walking down, you know, some main drag near the school, and he offered her a ride or something. And so they decided from that he must be the rapist, and which he wasn't. And so based on her, then they get one of the victims to pick his picture out of a photo spread, and then to pick him out in court, and he's convicted. And it was awful. It was awful. I mean, you can imagine, not only for him, but for his family. You know, here's his sister that's, you know, the only African American in the law school, and her brother's convicted of being the tech rapist. And anyway, so he goes off to the penitentiary. He doesn't lose hope. You know, his family's solidly behind him. We particularly befriend a brother of his, Corey Session, who, you know, for a long time worked with us and was on our board of directors. And by the time, you know, we're being notified of the case, the actual perpetrator has been confessing to the judge and the DA for some time in letters. And of course, they're deep sixing him. You know, they don't want to hear anything about that. And, you know, of course, I've recently tried to get rules passed that prosecutors would have a duty to disclose that sort of thing, but the prosecutors are fighting me on that. And he died in prison. He had asthma, and my understanding is he had a particularly acute asthma attack and died in prison. Now, I mean, I have to think that, you know, if it had been on the outside and been, you know, had access to better medical care, that probably never would have happened, but I don't know. They found the original sexual assault kit, and it was DNA tested. And the DNA test was not Tim's, but doesn't help Tim, who has now died in prison. So by now, I'm over in the Dallas DA's office, and Jeff is sort of carrying the case, and we had Texas has a sort of unique, seldom used procedure called a court of inquiry. And so Jeff was able to convince a judge in Austin to hold a court of inquiry on all of that. And I testified as an expert witness. Barry Scheck was involved. He actually is the one who questioned me. The actual perpetrator was brought to court, who got on the stand and confessed again. The victim was there and, you know, fully supportive of what was going on, and the judge declared him innocent in this court of inquiry. And ultimately, they were able to go to the governor, Rick Perry at the time, who first said, "I'm not able to give a posthumous pardon," but then, I guess with all the politics and the media and everything, he decided it was a political wise thing to do. So he gave Tim Cole a posthumous pardon and declared him actually innocent. And we've been able to use what we learned from that to get several laws. We had the Tim Cole Innocence Commission.
It's been a tough 3.5 decades for the family, but they have never stopped fighting for change, successfully passing the Timothy Cole Act in 2009 to increase the compensation given to exonerees. They also helped create the Tim Cole Advisory Panel on Wrongful Convictions to study its prevention across the state.
I have to give all the credit to my parents and our family and our faith. I know that his life had purpose, and I know that his life and his purpose has helped me achieve a lot of things in my life. And more than anything, you know, I know that his life will continue to inspire others. And so that's what continues to uplift me and carry me through these 35 years.